Greetings, friends, and welcome to the second episode of Dune and Beyond. If you like the content, please click a like, subscribe, and share. Tonight we're looking at House Atreides and the Ancient Greeks. And before I get started, I want to give a shout out to my friend Jared Cressman, who is delightfully picking up this book. And you're probably asking yourself, what in the world does Dune, or specifically House Atreides, have to do with the ancient Greeks? In a world of sandworms and spice and folding space and shields? Well, the answer is quite a bit. Specifically, tonight we're going to be taking a look at the relationship between the Atreides family that rules over the fiefdom of the planet Calidan, and then Arrakis very briefly, and their relationship and roots to the Greeks, specifically the Proto-Greeks from the Ancient Aegean civilization. Again, I think the connective tissue may surprise you a bit if you're not familiar with the novel. And here we have a depiction of House Atreides with the hawk crest behind them. And this is the depiction of House Atreides in the upcoming Villeneuve adaptation of Dune. And the Atreides are well respected in the feudal system that exists in the universe at the time. And I've said on a number of occasions that they've cultivated the better natures of their angels, so to speak. And at the center, you can see Duke Leto and Lady Jessica, the parents of Paul, who we'll talk about in just a moment. Leto, of course, is the Duke of the fiefdom of Calidan, and then briefly Arrakis, and he is the father of Paul Atreides and his consort, who remained his concubine, Lady Jessica, in the event that a political marriage could set him on the throne. At any rate, they were very much in love and had a son, Paul. They also had a daughter, Alia, but she's not central to the story until the second part of the book. But it is important to know a little bit about Paul, who's an interesting young man in the book. His father had him trained by a number of individuals and mentors, not only academically, but also he's trained by Thufir Hawat, a Mentat, a human computer, so he has that mental training. And he's also trained by his mother, who is a member of the Order of the Bene Gesserit, a female order who have heightened their mental and physical prowess to a great degree. So he has the benefit of a number of different kinds of training, not just the training, but also the machinations of the sisterhood his mother belonged to. One of their goals, well, for lack of a better word, it was really a eugenics project, was to create through selective breeding a highly developed, highly refined human being in terms of physical and mental prowess, but one that the sisterhood would be able to control. And Jessica was only supposed to bear daughters, but she chose to bear a son to Duke Leto. If this is already starting to take on the tenor of Greek tragedy, then that is probably not by mistake, but by design. And in fact, if you look at the name in terms of the etymology of the Atreides name, you could take that all the way back to the House of Atreides, from which Agamemnon was descended. In fact, Agamemnon is mentioned by name in the novels as an ancient ancestor. Of course, Agamemnon being the leader of the Achaean Mycenaean Confederacy during the Trojan War. And here is a picture of the famed death mask. Whether it is or not has yet to be determined, but Agamemnon probably was a historical figure who was later mythologized by the bards during the Greek Dark Age, and then in sort of finalized form by Homer in what we have in the Homeric epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And so there's some very stark connective tissue. Now, this one actually sort of snuck up on me. I don't know if Herbert did this on purpose, or he may have. He was an astute fellow, intelligent guy. But the very name Calidan, the planet, the fiefdom that House Atreides ruled over for centuries, if not millennia, if you look at it, that first part of it, Kali, is related to the Greek word kappa, alpha, lambda, lambda, alpha, Kala, which is the Greek word for good or beautiful. And the last part could be a derivative of Danai or Danoi, which is actually one of the names for the Achaeans, the Mycenaean Greeks in the Confederacy during the Trojan War, as depicted in the Homeric epics. In fact, the word Danoi is used something like 130, 140 times to reference the Achaeans. So it literally means the good Mycenaeans, or the good Proto-Greeks. That's fitting too. Now, here is the juiciest of juicy pictures, man. I was really excited about this, and this is a collage that was done. But if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you see an image from the new trailer, and in it you see a bullfight depicted, which was an ancient tradition of the Atreides. And even in David Lynch's new Dune, and in the failed Jodorowsky's Dune, you can see in the Lynch panel and in the concept art that it's depicted as well. Now, this is interesting because this bullfight is a reference to this monument that Leto was standing over in the first panel. This is a reference to an incident that took place during Paul's grandfather's time. In fact, his grandfather, depicted here in some concept art, Paulus Atreides, was killed in a bullfight by a Seleucid bull, and the head of it was hung in the Atreides Hall. The connective tissue here to the Greek world, although we typically think of bullfights as Iberian, the Aegean civilizations actually invented the bullfight. And here's a bullfight, a bull leaping contest from the palace at Knossos, which belonged to the Minoans. And the palace was founded about 2000 BC. So these are some rather ancient roots in terms of the connective tissue of that bullfight. Another thing that's always struck me about the Atreides line is that, particularly when you look at people like Duke Leto Atreides, he was never afraid to get his hands dirty. In the extended novels, he's talked about, he's fishing with the fishermen, he's out in the orchards. This is very much akin to what you see amongst a number of the Mycenaean kings during the Trojan War era, the Age of Heroes. Odysseus probably typifies this the best, because Odysseus actually built his own palace, and he's described as being comfortable amongst his subjects, and he goes out and takes part in the agriculture and the pastoralism that sustains his kingdom, and his people loved him for it. And that's almost an exact copy in terms of the character of not only Duke Leto Atreides, but the entire Atreides line. Like I said, Agamemnon was not necessarily a heroic character, but there were heroic Greeks that the Atreides sort of emulate. And perhaps one of the most interesting elements that connects the Atreides line back to their Greek roots is a feud between House Atreides and House Harkonnen, their old enemies. And this feud dates back to the Machine Crusade that takes place thousands of years before the timeline of Dune. But what I wanted to bring to bear here is that the feud does lead to a war, but it's decided basically by a duel between the last surviving members, Paul and Feud, and Paul of House Atreides and Feud of House Harkonnen. Now, this is more reminiscent of Greek heroes calling one another out, champions calling one another out to into conflict in much the same way that you see, for example, Achilles calling out Hector, the Prince of Troy, to decide the fate of a particular battle. And this theme shows up again and again in Greek mythology, and is preserved to an extent in later Greek tragedies. And those Greek tragedies really set the tone for the sort of tragic heroes of the Atreides line. And another thing to consider in terms of the Dune world, the Atreides, and their connection back to the Greek world, is that there's much at stake here in terms of the spice. It's the most valuable commodity in the world, or in the universe rather, that House Atreides is briefly setting over and then ends up going to war with House Harkonnen over. In much the same way, in the wake of the fall of the Minoan Empire, there's a power vacuum, and you've got these kingdoms, the Mycenaeans on the one hand, which is really a confederacy, and then the Trojans, the people of Ilios in western Anatolia, who are vying for hegemony in the ancient Aegean world, for the capital that comes from all of the commerce in the Aegean. And of course, by proxy, that would include trade with the ancient Levant, people like the Phoenicians and others living on the coast of the ancient Levant. And so the war that erupts in the Dune universe over this, at which House Atreides and House Harkonnen are at the heart of, is very much like the Trojan War. All right, I'll see you next time. Godspeed.